Burman. I'm former head of Al Jazeera English for the last 3 years. Prior to that, for a long time, I was with the CBC and head of news and current affairs for about 7 years at the CBC.
What have you come away from this year with? How emerging technology is changing news?
The last couple of years at Al Jazeera were far more groundbreaking than, for example, my years at the CBC were. Simply because of the development of the social media and then also the unique the eruption of the revolutions in the Arab world, which I think they came together in a very kind of unique way. I'm trying to better understand how we here in Canada and in North America in general interact with social media and how social media is having or are having an impact on the way that traditional journalism is evolving. I've always believed that in any reality there are a diversity of perspectives and a diversity of voices, and that there's not any single one, and a journalist who tries to be an eyewitness to an event has got to be humble enough to realize that his or her perspective is limited by the eyes that they have and limited by their own experiences. So they must be dependent on other voices and other perspectives to provide their audiences with a fuller, more comprehensive, dare I say, truer reflection of what that reality is. I think that a lot of us over the years have learned that, particularly in broadcast journalism and television, that too many stories and too many issues are reduced to an either-or, two polarities. And a lot of that is an outcome of kind of the brevity of television, where you can't really deal with too much gray in between the black and the white. Black and white is very easy to portray, and yet I think most of us are knowledgeable enough and sophisticated enough to realize that the nuance and the truth, to the extent there is any truth, really lies in between the polarities. So I think in that sense, I think that the social media has enabled all of us who work in the mainstream media and who now work in so-called multi-platform news organizations to better reflect the diversity of issues and the broad multitude of opinions on so many issues.
The other issue that's arising is this idea of the filter bubble, or that we have the social media, and so we're only really getting the news that we already want to hear, the perspective we already agree with.
One of the advantages of social media, and one of the advantages of being open to a diversity of media sources, is that you're able proactively to seek out and to experience other perspectives. I think that there is a fear on the part of a lot of people that people aren't doing that. They're essentially discovering what their comfort zone is on a particular issue or a particular perspective, and then settling down and communicating or interacting solely with that. At the end of the day, I mean, we as individuals have got to choose what we choose to choose, and if we want to remain in our little bubble, then we're allowed democratically to. I think it's a sad thing, but I'm not. I think as the world becomes more and more complicated and if not frightening, certainly threatening in terms of a lot of things that are kind of emerging, I think that will encourage and stimulate people to get outside their comfort zone. There should be a partnership between professionally trained journalists who work in mainstream news organizations and the incredibly important social media activists who are out there providing the material. I think Al Jazeera's experience in the so-called Arab Spring, where our Al Jazeera journalists were prevented from actually getting to the story and covering the story because they were so politically targeted by the dictatorships in the Arab world. What Al Jazeera had to do then, they had to rely on a lot of so-called quote-unquote ordinary people who had cell phones, who had computers, who had their eyes and had a real energy and enthusiasm to get the word out.
What are the lessons that, if it is a North American organization, could take away from that?
Well, I mean, I guess there are two lessons. I think number one, that social media is not an outlet for ranting, should not solely be an outlet for commercially driven initiatives, is not solely an outlet for entertainment and celebrity news and distraction. I mean, the social media, I think, used by people who are engaged in their society is a tool to better understand how that society works. The second lesson, really, which is on the part of the mainstream news organizations, is that they should interact with these forces in a very kind of respectful, humble way, that just as from the time that journalism was created, it was always dependent on eyewitnesses. In other words, journalists, for all of their ego issues, never had the temerity to assume they could be everywhere at all times. So they always relied on eyewitnesses as part of their stories, beginning in print and expanding into broadcast media. So in that sense, social media users, whether they're bloggers or activists or whether they're simply individuals with cell phones, are eyewitnesses. And so the issue is not, should you tap into it? Of course you can. You have been for the past 2,000 years in one way or the other. The question is, how do you do it? How do you do it in a way that you're not manipulated? How do you do it in a way that you can kind of double source and double check that information that perhaps is suspect? And that's really a process issue.